The millionaire's baby wouldn't stop crying on the plane. Then a black woman did the unthinkable. The business class cabin of Flight 228 was silent until a baby's cries pierced the air. Passengers groaned, attendants whispered, and in the middle of it all sat Evan Brooks, a millionaire tech CEO, cradling his 6-month-old daughter, Lila. His face was weary not from wealth or work, but from sleepless nights and grief. His wife had passed months earlier, leaving him to raise their baby alone. No amount of success could prepare him for this. Lila cried harder, kicking and screaming. As he tried everything, a bottle, her favorite toy, a lullaby whispered through tears. Nothing worked. Then, from across the aisle, a calm voice spoke. "Excuse me," said Danielle Carter, a young black woman in her late 20s. "Would you like me to try?" Evan blinked, hesitant. I don't know if she'll stop. She hasn't since takeoff." Danielle gave him a gentle smile. "I've been a nanny for years. Babies are my specialty." He nodded, too tired to protest. She took Lila carefully, cradling her close against her chest, and began humming softly an old lullaby her grandmother used to sing. The moment her warm voice filled the air, the baby quieted. Within minutes, she was fast asleep. The cabin, once restless, grew silent. A few passengers even smiled. Evan looked at Danielle with pure disbelief. "You must have magic in your voice," he whispered. Danielle chuckled. "No, just patience and a heartbeat that says, 'You're safe.'" Before we go deeper into this story, I want you to drop a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time is it. If you are new to this channel, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Evan Brooks had boarded Flight 228 from San Francisco to New York with a sense of dread that had become his constant companion over the past 4 months. The dread wasn't about the business meetings waiting in Manhattan, those he could handle with the same confident competence that had built his tech company into a billion-dollar enterprise by the time he was 35. The dread was about traveling alone with Lila, about the inevitable crying that would start the moment they boarded, about feeling utterly helpless as his 6-month-old daughter screamed, and he had absolutely no idea how to comfort her. Before Sarah died, Evan had been the typical successful businessman father, loving but largely absent, present for bedtime stories when work allowed, enjoying the fun moments of fatherhood while delegating most of the actual parenting work to his wife. Sarah had taken maternity leave from her own legal career to care for Lila, and she'd made it look so effortless. She'd known instinctively what each different cry meant, how to soothe Lila when she was fussy, when to let her cry it out versus when to intervene immediately. Evan had watched in admiration, assuming he'd learn these skills gradually over time as Lila grew older and he became more involved. Then came the car accident 4 months ago, a drunk driver running a red light at 2 in the afternoon. Sarah had been driving home from a doctor's appointment. The other driver walked away with minor injuries. Sarah died at the scene, and Evan's world had shattered completely, leaving him not just grieving his beloved wife, but suddenly solely responsible for a 2-month-old baby he barely knew how to care for. The first weeks had been a blur of funeral arrangements, relatives visiting to offer condolences, and Evan attempting to manage basic infant care while in shock. His mother had stayed for 2 weeks, handling most of Lila's needs while Evan moved through his days in a fog of grief. When she'd left, she had her own life and couldn't stay indefinitely. Evan had hired the first nanny through an agency his assistant recommended. That nanny had lasted 3 weeks before quitting, claiming Lila cried too much, and Evan's demanding work schedule made the job untenable. The second nanny had lasted slightly longer, 5 weeks, but had eventually given similar reasons for leaving. The third nanny had quit just 2 days ago after a particularly difficult weekend when Evan had to travel unexpectedly for business and couldn't be reached during a childcare crisis. Now Evan was on this flight with no nanny, no backup plan, and a crying baby who seemed to sense his stress and respond by crying even harder. He'd tried everything he could think of feeding her, changing her diaper in the cramped airplane bathroom, walking her up and down the aisle before takeoff, until the flight attendants had asked him to sit down, offering her pacifier and toys and anything that might provide comfort. Nothing worked. Lila just cried and cried, her face red and scrunched, tiny fists waving in distress. The judgmental stares from other passengers made everything worse. The businessman across the aisle had put on expensive noise-cancelling headphones with an expression of disgust. The woman behind Evan had made several pointed comments about parents who don't know how to control their children and inconsiderate people who bring babies on flights. Even the flight attendants, though professionally polite, clearly wished Evan and his crying baby were on a different flight. Evan felt like the worst father in existence. Sarah would have known what to do. Sarah had always known what to do, but Sarah was gone, and Evan was failing spectacularly at the most basic task of comforting his own daughter. The guilt was overwhelming, not just about failing Lila in this moment, but about having been such an absent father when Sarah was alive. About not learning these essential parenting skills when he'd had the chance, about being so focused on his company that he'd missed the opportunity to truly bond with his daughter. That's when he'd heard the voice from across the aisle, calm, confident, offering help with absolutely no judgment in her tone. "Excuse me, would you like me to try?" Evan had looked up through his exhaustion to see a young black woman with the kindest eyes he'd ever encountered. She was maybe in her late 20s, dressed in jeans and a comfortable sweater, her natural hair in beautiful curls framing her face. Something about her presence radiated competence and warmth, like she genuinely wanted to help, rather than just wanting the crying to stop so she could enjoy her flight in peace. I don't know if she'll stop," Evan had admitted, his voice hoarse from stress and the beginnings of tears he was trying to hold back. "She hasn't stopped since we boarded. I've tried everything I know how to do. I've been a nanny for years," the woman had said gently. "Babies are my specialty. Sometimes they just need a different person, a different energy. Would you mind if I tried to calm her?" Evan had nodded, too desperate and exhausted to worry about whether letting a stranger hold his daughter was appropriate airplane etiquette or safe parenting practice. He just needed the crying to stop, needed Lila to find some comfort, needed to not feel like such a complete failure for one blessed moment. The woman, she'd quickly introduced herself as Danielle, had taken Lila with the practiced ease of someone who'd held hundreds of babies. She'd positioned Lila against her chest in a specific way, the baby's ear pressed against Danielle's heart, one of Danielle's hands supporting Lila's bottom, while the other cradled her head gently. Then Danielle had started humming a low, melodic lullaby that seemed to vibrate through her chest, where Lila rested. The transformation had been almost miraculous. Lila's desperate screaming had quieted almost immediately to hiccuping sobs. Within a minute, the sobs had faded to quiet whimpers. By the 3-minute mark, Lila had gone completely silent, her tiny body relaxing against Danielle's chest. And by 5 minutes, Lila was sound asleep, her little mouth slightly open, her breathing deep and even, one small fist clutching the fabric of Danielle's sweater. Evan had just stared in absolute amazement. After an hour of non-stop crying, after trying everything he could think of, this stranger had calmed his daughter in less than 5 minutes just by holding her and humming. "How did you do that?" Evan had whispered, not wanting to risk waking Lila but desperate to understand what magic Danielle had performed. "It's not magic," Danielle had said with a gentle smile. "Babies respond to heartbeats and vibrations. When I hold her like this and hum, she can feel the vibrations through my chest. It mimics what she felt in the womb, safe, warm, surrounded by rhythm and sound. The heartbeat especially is calming because it's the first sound babies hear and associate with safety. Heather. Plus," Danielle had continued quietly, "I'm calm, so she becomes calm. Babies are incredibly sensitive to the emotional state of whoever's holding them. If you're stressed and anxious, which you clearly were, and who could blame you, the baby picks up on that and becomes stressed too. It creates a feedback loop that's hard to break." Evan had felt both enlightened and more guilty. "So I've been making it worse. My anxiety has been making her more anxious. You've been doing your best in an impossible situation," Danielle had corrected gently but firmly. There's a huge difference between knowing intellectually that babies sense emotions and being able to actually stay calm when your child is screaming and everyone's judging you and you're exhausted and grieving. "Don't blame yourself for being human, Evan." She'd known his name because he'd introduced himself. But hearing her say it with such understanding and compassion had made Evan's throat tight with emotion he was barely holding back. "How did you know I'm grieving?" he'd asked quietly. "The way you hold her like she's precious, but you're terrified of breaking her. The exhaustion in your eyes that goes deeper than just sleepless nights. The way you tried so hard with her but looked like you didn't quite know what you were doing." And Danielle had hesitated, then continued gently, "You mentioned trying everything you know how to do. Most parents would say, 'Everything, not everything I know how to do.' That phrasing suggests you're aware there are things you don't know, which usually means you're newer to solo parenting than the baby's age would suggest." "My wife died 4 months ago," Evan had said, the words still feeling surreal even after saying them hundreds of times to well-meaning people offering condolences. "Car accident. Lila was 2 months old. Sarah, my wife, she was the one who knew how to do all this. I was the career-focused father who showed up for the fun parts but left the actual parenting to her. Now I'm alone, and I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. I'm so sorry for your loss," Danielle had said, and unlike the countless people who'd offered those words over the past months, she'd sounded like she genuinely meant it, rather than just saying what social convention required. That's an unimaginable situation, grieving your wife while trying to care for an infant by yourself. No wonder you're struggling. Anyone would be. They'd talked quietly for the rest of the flight, Lila sleeping peacefully against Danielle's chest the entire time. Danielle had shared that she worked as a preschool teacher in Brooklyn, teaching 3- and 4-year-olds at a Montessori school. Before that, she'd been a professional nanny for 7 years, caring for children from infancy through school age. She'd started babysitting at 14 to help her single mother make ends meet, discovered she had a natural affinity for childcare, and had built her entire career around working with children. "What made you offer to help with Lila?" Evan had asked. "Most people on planes just want crying babies to be someone else's problem." "I couldn't not offer," Danielle had said simply. "I could see you were doing your best and that you genuinely cared about comforting her but didn't know how. Plus, I love babies. Helping a distressed infant feel safe isn't a burden for me, it's genuinely fulfilling. I know that sounds cheesy, but it's true." "It doesn't sound cheesy," Evan had assured her. "It sounds like you've found your calling, which is rare and valuable." Danielle had taught Evan some basic techniques during the flight, how to hold Lila to maximize the calming effect of heartbeat and body warmth, how to recognize different types of cries and what they typically meant, the humming technique she'd used so effectively, ways to soothe an overtired baby versus a hungry one versus one who just needed a diaper change. She'd been patient and non-judgmental, treating Evan like an intelligent adult who just needed information rather than like an incompetent parent who should already know these things. "You're going to be fine," Danielle had told him as the plane began its descent into JFK. "You clearly love Lila desperately. You're trying your best. You're humble enough to accept help and advice. Those qualities are more important than knowing every baby-soothing trick. The technical skills you can learn, the love and commitment you already have." "I don't feel fine," Evan had admitted. "I feel like I'm drowning and failing her every day." "That's grief talking," Danielle had said gently. "Grief makes everything harder, makes you doubt yourself constantly. But Evan, you got on this plane alone with a baby despite knowing it would be difficult. You tried everything you could think of to comfort her. You accepted help when it was offered. Those are all signs of a good parent who's doing his absolute best in terrible circumstances." When the plane landed and passengers began deplaning, several people stopped to smile at the peacefully sleeping baby or to murmur quiet compliments to Danielle for calming her. The businessman who'd been so irritated earlier actually nodded approvingly. Even the critical woman behind them said, "Well, at least someone knew what they were doing," which Evan chose to interpret generously as acknowledgement that babies could in fact be calmed, rather than as continued criticism of his parenting. In the terminal, Evan had insisted on buying Danielle coffee as a thank you. They'd found a Starbucks and settled in with lattes, Lila still sleeping peacefully in Danielle's arms. It was during this coffee that Evan had found himself making an impulsive but increasingly urgent offer. "I know this is sudden," Evan had said, "but I need help with Lila. Real, Consistent help from someone who actually knows what they're doing with babies. The nannies I've hired through agencies haven't worked out. Lila cries with all of them, which stresses them out, which makes Lila cry more. It's been a disaster, but she's peaceful with you. You clearly have the skills I desperately need. Would you consider being her nanny? Danielle had looked surprised. Evan, that's very flattering, but I have a teaching job in Brooklyn, and I literally just met you a few hours ago on a plane. Don't you think this is moving a bit fast? Probably, Evan had admitted, but I'm desperate, and you're the first person besides my late wife who's been able to calm Lila. I'll pay whatever's appropriate, more than appropriate. You'd have your own living space in my apartment, guaranteed time off, health insurance, whatever you need. And, he'd hesitated, then continued, I know you mentioned wanting to open your own daycare someday. I can help make that happen if you work for me, help you save and plan and eventually start your own business. You're offering to help fund my dream in exchange for childcare? Danielle had asked carefully. I'm offering fair compensation for invaluable services, Evan had clarified. The career development support would just be part of that compensation package. Danielle, I need someone who can actually help Lila, who has the skills and patience to give her the care she deserves, while I'm trying to run my company and process grief and figure out how to be a single father. You demonstrated in one flight that you have those skills. I'm not asking you to sacrifice your dreams. I'm asking if we can structure something where helping me also helps you achieve yours. Danielle had considered this seriously, sipping her latte while clearly weighing the offer. The school year ends in 6 weeks, she'd finally said. I couldn't leave my students before then. It wouldn't be fair to them or to my school. But after the year ends, if you're still interested and if we can work out appropriate arrangements and boundaries, then yes, I'd be willing to be Lila's nanny. 6 weeks I can manage, Evan had said, relief flooding through him. My mother can come help for part of that time, and I'll find temporary help for the rest. Danielle, thank you. You have no idea what this means to me. I think I do, Danielle had said gently, looking at Lila sleeping peacefully in her arms. Every parent deserves support, especially parents dealing with what you're dealing with. I'm glad I can help. Before parting ways at the airport, Evan had insisted on one more thing. Let me take you to dinner tonight. Not as a business arrangement, but as a proper thank you for saving me on that flight. And also because he'd hesitated, then continued honestly, because I'd like to get to know you better before you commit to living in my home and caring for my daughter. You should know who you'd be working for. Dinner sounds nice, Danielle had agreed, as long as Lila comes too. I should probably see how she does with me in different settings, right? Plus, you could use another lesson in baby soothing techniques, and there's no better teacher than hands-on practice. That evening, Evan had picked up Danielle from her friend's apartment in Brooklyn, where she was staying during her New York visit. He'd been nervous getting Lila ready, worried he'd somehow mess up and embarrass himself before Danielle even officially started working for him. He'd managed to get Lila dressed, but had put her outfit on backwards, had forgotten her favorite stuffed rabbit, and hadn't thought to bring extra diapers until the last-minute panic moment. Danielle had noticed all of this with amusement, but had helped fix everything with no judgment, turned Lila's outfit around, retrieved the rabbit from where it had fallen under the car seat, found the diapers Evan had eventually remembered to pack. She'd made Evan feel capable rather than incompetent, which was a gift he hadn't realized he needed so desperately. They'd gone to a family-friendly Italian restaurant in Manhattan that Evan knew had high chairs, changing tables in the bathrooms, and staff who were patient with dining families. Lila had been awake and alert during dinner, watching Danielle with obvious fascination, reaching for her with chubby baby hands, giggling when Danielle played peekaboo behind her napkin. She's laughing, Evan had said, stunned. I haven't heard her laugh like that since. His voice had broken slightly. Since before Sarah died. I'd forgotten she could be joyful like this. She's still a joyful baby, Danielle had assured him gently. She's just been grieving in her way too. Babies feel their parents' emotions intensely. Your grief has been surrounding her for months. Now that you're feeling a bit lighter, now that you have hope things might improve, she can feel that too and respond with her natural happiness. That insight had hit Evan hard, the realization that his daughter had been sad because he was sad, that his inability to process grief while parenting had been affecting Lila's entire emotional state. It was both devastating and oddly hopeful. If his emotions affected hers, then maybe as he healed, she would too. Maybe they could find joy together again. Over dinner, they talked about everything Danielle's childhood in Philadelphia. As the oldest of 3 siblings, raised by a single mother, her path through various childcare jobs that had taught her everything she knew about children, her dream of opening an in-home daycare that served working-class families who couldn't afford expensive childcare centers. Evan had shared more about his company, about meeting Sarah in graduate school and their whirlwind romance, about the devastating suddenness of her death and how lost he'd been ever since. "Do you have family nearby?" Danielle had asked. "Parents, siblings, anyone who can help?" "My mother lives in California," Evan had said. "She's visited several times since Sarah died, but she has her own life and can't be here constantly. Sarah's parents are in Florida, same situation. My sister lives in London with her family. Everyone's been supportive from a distance, but the day-to-day reality of single parenting an infant, I'm mostly handling that alone." "That's incredibly isolating," Danielle had observed. "No wonder you're struggling." "Evan, humans aren't meant to raise babies in isolation. We're supposed to have communities, support systems, multiple caregivers, so no one person carries the entire burden. You've been trying to do everything alone while grieving and running a company. That's unsustainable." Which is why I need help," Evan had said. "Real help, from someone capable and kind. Someone like you." When Lila had started getting fussy toward the end of the meal, Danielle had lifted her from the high chair with practiced ease and had begun the humming technique she'd used on the plane. Within minutes, Lila had calmed completely, contentedly sucking her pacifier against Danielle's shoulder, her eyes starting to droop with sleepiness. "You really do have magic," Evan had said, watching this transformation with continued amazement. "Not magic," Danielle had corrected with a smile. "Just experience and genuine affection for babies. And Evan, I want you to know something. If I take this job when I take this job after the school year ends, it won't be just for the salary or benefits you're offering, as generous as they are. It'll be because I genuinely want to help Lila and because I think I can support you through this difficult transition. Childcare isn't just a paycheck for me, it's always personal. I wouldn't want it any other way," Evan had said sincerely. "Lila needs someone who actually cares about her well-being, not just someone going through motions for money. I can see that you're that person, Danielle." As Evan had driven Danielle back to Brooklyn after dinner, Lila sleeping peacefully in her car seat, he'd felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death: genuine hope. Not just hope that he'd found competent childcare help, though that was certainly part of it, but hope that maybe, just maybe, things could actually get better, that he could raise his daughter well despite not knowing what he was doing, that joy could exist alongside grief, that life could continue even after devastating loss. And somehow, the person who'd sparked this hope was someone he'd met just hours ago, a stranger who'd heard his baby crying on an airplane and had offered help instead of judgment. Someone who seemed to genuinely care about both Lila and Evan despite knowing them for less than a day. Someone whose presence made everything feel a little less overwhelming, a little more manageable. "Thank you, Danielle," Evan had said as they'd pulled up to her friend's building in Brooklyn, "for everything today, for helping with Lila on the plane, for teaching me things I desperately needed to know, for dinner and conversation, for agreeing to be her nanny. You've given me hope when I'd almost given up on feeling hopeful." "You're going to be okay," Danielle had assured him warmly. "Both of you are. You're a good father, Evan. You love your daughter, you're trying your absolute best, and you're humble enough to accept help when you need it. Those qualities matter far more than whether you know all the perfect baby-soothing techniques. The techniques can be learned, the love and commitment you already have." After Danielle had gone inside, Evan had sat in the car for a long moment, just looking at Lila sleeping peacefully in the back seat. His daughter, Sarah's daughter, who'd been so profoundly unhappy for so long, but who'd laughed tonight for the first time in months, who'd fallen asleep easily instead of crying for hours, who'd seemed to instinctively trust this kind stranger who'd entered their lives. Maybe, Evan had thought, sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected places and at the most desperate moments. Maybe the universe had put Danielle in that airplane seat across from him specifically because he'd needed her and Lila had needed her, and somehow the three of them were meant to help each other through this difficult time. As Evan had driven home through Manhattan's late-night streets, Lila sleeping soundly in the back, he'd allowed himself to imagine a future that didn't feel quite so dark and impossible, a future where his daughter was genuinely happy, a future where he could be both a good father and a successful CEO, a future where grief existed but didn't consume everything, a future with Danielle as part of their family, helping them heal and grow and find joy again. He'd had no way of knowing that night just how right his instincts were, that Danielle would become far more than Lila's nanny, that the woman who'd calmed his crying baby at 30,000 feet would eventually become the person who helped calm all the chaos in his life and heart. He'd just known that meeting her had changed something fundamental, had opened possibilities he'd thought were closed forever after Sarah's death. Sometimes life-changing moments didn't announce themselves dramatically. Sometimes they looked like a crying baby on a crowded airplane, a kind stranger offering help, and a grieving father finally accepting that he couldn't do everything alone. And sometimes those ordinary moments became the foundation for something extraordinary: healing, connection, family, and eventually love. But that night, exhausted and hopeful, and still adjusting to the idea that things might actually improve, Evan had just been grateful. Grateful for Danielle's kindness. Grateful that Lila had finally slept peacefully. Grateful that maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay after all. 6 weeks after their fateful airplane meeting, Danielle arrived at Evan's Manhattan penthouse with 2 suitcases, a box of her favorite books, and nervous excitement about this new chapter of her life. She'd finished her school year at the Montessori school with a bittersweet goodbye from her students and fellow teachers, all of whom had been supportive when she'd explained the opportunity she couldn't refuse: better pay, valuable experience, and the chance to save toward opening her own daycare. Evan greeted her at the door with Lila on his hip, the baby kicking her legs excitedly the moment she saw Danielle. "She remembers you," Evan said, smiling with obvious relief. "I was worried 6 weeks was too long, that she'd forgotten and we'd have to start over building trust." "Babies have better memories than people think," Danielle said, reaching for Lila, who immediately lunged toward her with happy babbling sounds. "Plus, we bonded during that flight. She felt safe with me then, and some part of her remembers that feeling, even if she can't consciously recall the specific event." Evan showed Danielle to her suite, a beautiful space with a bedroom, private bathroom, and small sitting area that gave her genuine privacy and separation from the rest of the apartment. "I wanted you to have your own space," Evan explained. "Somewhere you can retreat when you're off duty and not feel like you're constantly working just by being in the same apartment. The door locks from the inside if you want complete privacy, and you have your own entrance through the kitchen if you prefer to come and go without walking through the main living areas." "This is much nicer than I expected," Danielle admitted, setting her suitcases down and looking around the tastefully furnished space. "Most live-in nanny positions I know of involve a small room with shared bathroom access. This is like having my own apartment within your apartment." "You deserve comfort and privacy," Evan said simply. "Danielle, I want to establish something from the beginning. When you're off duty on your scheduled days off or during evening hours when I'm home and responsible for Lila, this is your private space, and I won't intrude unless there's an emergency. I don't want you to feel like you're always working or always on call. Clear boundaries are important for both of us." They spent the first day establishing routines and expectations. Danielle would be responsible for Lila from 7 in the morning until 6 in the evening on weekdays, with flexibility for occasional evening or weekend needs that would be compensated as overtime. Evan would handle mornings before 7 and evenings after 6. Plus, he'd be fully responsible during Danielle's 2 days off each week. They'd communicate through a shared calendar app about schedule changes, and they'd have weekly check-in meetings to discuss Lila's development and any concerns. I also think you should teach me everything you know, Evan said during their planning session. Not to replace you, but so I can be a competent parent during the hours I'm responsible for Lila. The past 6 weeks have been better than before my mother came for 2 weeks, and I hired a temporary nanny for the remaining time, but I still don't feel confident in my own parenting abilities. That's actually really healthy, Danielle said approvingly. Lots of parents who hire nannies use them as complete replacements for their own involvement rather than as support for their parenting. The fact that you want to learn and improve shows you're committed to being an active father, not just an employer of childcare. Over the following weeks, Danielle did exactly that. She taught Evan everything she knew about infant care, while also providing the consistent, loving attention Lila needed to thrive. She showed him how to prepare bottles at the right temperature, how to introduce solid foods in ways that minimized choking risks, how to create bedtime routines that actually worked, how to interpret Lila's different cries and respond appropriately to each one. But more than the technical skills, Danielle taught Evan how to be present with his daughter, how to engage with her during playtime rather than just supervising while checking emails, how to read her cues about when she wanted interaction versus when she needed quiet time, how to enjoy the small moments watching her discover her own hands, hearing her first attempts at words, seeing her personality emerge as she grew and developed. "You're a natural at this," Evan observed one evening, watching Danielle give Lila a bath with expert efficiency while somehow making it feel playful and fun rather than just a necessary task. "How did you learn to be so good with babies?" "Practice, mostly," Danielle said, supporting Lila's head while washing her sparse baby hair. "I've been caring for children since I was 14, so I've had 15 years of on-the-job training. But honestly, a lot of it is just genuinely enjoying babies and being willing to meet them where they are, rather than expecting them to conform to adult expectations." "What do you mean by that?" Evan asked, sitting on the bathroom floor to be at eye level for this conversation. "Adults often expect babies to behave in ways that are developmentally unrealistic," Danielle explained, lifting Lila out of the bath and wrapping her in a fluffy towel. "They expect them not to cry, to sleep through the night from birth, to self-soothe immediately, to be convenient and quiet. But babies are humans with needs they can't meet themselves. They cry because it's their only form of communication. They wake at night because their stomachs are small and they genuinely need food. They need physical comfort because they're literally not developmentally capable of self-soothing yet." She cuddled Lila against her shoulder, patting the baby's back gently. "When you meet babies where they actually are developmentally, rather than where you wish they were, caring for them becomes so much easier. You stop fighting their natural needs and instead work with them. That shift in perspective changes everything." Evan absorbed this wisdom, recognizing how much of his early struggling with Lila had come from unrealistic expectations shaped by cultural narratives about babies who were good because they didn't cry much or slept well. Lila wasn't a bad baby, she was a normal baby with normal needs that Evan hadn't known how to meet. 3 months into Danielle's employment, Evan's company faced a major crisis that required him to travel to Seattle for a week of intensive meetings. He'd been dreading this trip, worried about leaving Lila despite knowing Danielle was more than capable of handling everything. The night before his departure, Evan found himself unable to sleep, anxiety churning in his stomach. Around midnight, he went to the kitchen for water and found Danielle there, also unable to sleep, working on business plan drafts for the daycare she hoped to open someday. "You're up late," Evan observed, pouring himself water from the filtered pitcher. "Could say the same about you," Danielle replied with a slight smile. "Let me guess, anxious about traveling tomorrow." "Is it that obvious?" Evan asked, sitting down at the kitchen island across from where Danielle was working. "It's completely normal," Danielle assured him. "You've never left Lila for more than a day since Sarah died. Of course you're anxious. But Evan, we'll be fine. I'll send you photos and videos every day. We can video call at bedtime so you can say goodnight to her. And I promise I'll contact you immediately if anything concerning happens." "I know intellectually that you're completely capable," Evan said. "But emotionally, leaving her feels impossible. What if something happens and I'm not here? What if she needs me and I'm 3,000 miles away?" Then I'll handle it, because that's what you're paying me to do, Danielle said gently. Evan, part of trusting childcare help means actually trusting them to handle situations in your absence. You've seen how well Lila and I work together. You know I love her and will keep her safe. You have to let yourself believe that, or you'll never be able to focus on your work when you travel. When did you become so wise? Evan asked with a slight smile. I've always been this wise, Danielle teased. You just didn't notice because you were too busy being stressed about everything. Her expression softened. Seriously though, Evan, you've come so far in 3 months. You're a genuinely good father now, confident, capable, engaged with Lila in ways you weren't when we met. Trust yourself and trust me. We've got this. The Seattle trip went surprisingly well, largely because Danielle kept her promise about daily updates. Evan received photos of Lila's meals, videos of her playing with her favorite toys, brief video calls where he could see his daughter's smiling face and hear Danielle's updates about their day. The communication helped Evan feel connected despite the distance and reassured him that Lila was genuinely thriving in his absence. When Evan returned from Seattle, Lila squealed with delight seeing him and reached for him immediately, clear evidence that a week apart hadn't damaged their bond and that she still very much wanted and needed her father. Evan felt relief flood through him as he held his daughter close, breathing in her baby shampoo scent and feeling her warm weight against his chest. See, Danielle said, watching this reunion with satisfaction. She missed you, but she was fine. And now you know you can travel when necessary without everything falling apart. That's important, Evan. You need to be able to do your work without constant guilt and anxiety. Thank you, Evan said sincerely, not just for taking excellent care of her, but for the updates and communication that made it possible for me to focus on work while I was gone. You went above and beyond what I expected. That's what good childcare looks like, Danielle replied. It's not just managing the child's needs, but also supporting the parents' needs, which includes helping you feel connected to Lila, even when you're traveling. I want you to be able to succeed at both parenting and your career, not feel like you have to sacrifice one for the other. 6 months into Danielle's employment, Evan's mother visited for Thanksgiving. Margaret Brooks had been cautiously supportive when Evan had first told her about hiring a nanny he'd met on an airplane, clearly worried that her grieving son was making impulsive decisions. But within hours of meeting Danielle, Margaret's concerns evaporated completely. You're wonderful with Lila, Margaret told Danielle after watching her handle the baby's evening routine with expert efficiency, while still making it feel warm and loving rather than mechanical. But more than that, you're wonderful for Evan. He's been so lost since Sarah died, and you've somehow helped him find himself again. I can't thank you enough for that. Evan did the work himself, Danielle said graciously. I just provided support and taught him some practical skills. He's the one who showed up every day, who practiced the techniques I taught him, who chose to be present with Lila instead of just delegating everything to me. That commitment comes from him, not from me. But you made that commitment possible, Margaret insisted. Before you came, he was drowning. Now he's thriving. That transformation happened because you gave him the tools and support he needed. Don't minimize your impact, Danielle. Over Thanksgiving dinner, Margaret asked Danielle about her own family and background. Danielle shared stories about her mother who'd raised 3 children alone after Danielle's father left when she was 8, about her younger siblings who were both in college now thanks to scholarships and work-study programs, about the grandmother who'd taught her everything she knew about childcare by running an informal daycare from their home throughout Danielle's childhood. Your grandmother sounds like she was remarkable, Margaret said. Is she still alive? She passed away 2 years ago, Danielle said, sadness evident in her voice. But her legacy lives on. She taught me that caring for children is sacred work, that every child deserves to feel safe and loved, regardless of their family's economic circumstances, that good childcare can literally change the trajectory of someone's life. That's why I want to open my own daycare someday, to honor her legacy and provide the kind of care she modeled. Tell me about this daycare dream, Margaret encouraged, and Danielle spent the next 20 minutes explaining her vision, an in-home facility that could serve 12 children, mixing income levels so wealthy families' tuition would subsidize spots for low-income families who needed quality care but couldn't afford market rates. She'd researched licensing requirements, studied successful models from other cities, created detailed business plans accounting for every possible expense and revenue stream. "This is incredibly well thought out," Margaret said, impressed. "Have you started fundraising or applying for small business loans?" "I've saved about 15,000 so far," Danielle said. "Evan's been very generous with salary and benefits, which has allowed me to save aggressively. But I need at least 50,000 to launch realistically space rental, licensing, insurance, equipment, supplies, enough operating capital to survive the first 6 months before enrollment stabilizes. I'm probably still a couple years away from having enough saved." After Danielle had gone to her suite for the evening and Lila was sleeping peacefully in her crib, Margaret approached Evan in his home office. "I like her very much," Margaret said without preamble. "She's exactly what you and Lila needed." "I know," Evan agreed. "I don't know what I would have done without her these past 6 months, Mom. She's transformed everything, not just Lila's care, but my entire ability to parent effectively. I actually feel confident now instead of constantly terrified I'm ruining my daughter." "Have you thought about helping her with the daycare dream?" Margaret asked carefully. "It sounds like a project that aligns with your values, and you certainly have the resources to make it happen much faster than she could on her own." "I've thought about it constantly," Evan admitted, "but I don't want to make Danielle feel obligated or create weird power dynamics where she feels indebted to me beyond our employer-employee relationship. She's already been incredibly generous with her time and expertise. I don't want to complicate that by offering financial help that might make things awkward." "What if you structured it as an investment rather than a gift?" Margaret suggested. "You invest in the daycare as a business venture. She retains ownership and control, and you get returns if it's successful. That way it's a genuine business arrangement rather than charity that might make her uncomfortable." Evan considered this seriously. "That could work. Let me think about how to approach it without making her feel pressured." 1 year after Danielle had started working for Evan, Lila celebrated her first birthday with a small party attended by Evan's family, Danielle's family, and a few close friends. Watching his daughter blow out her birthday candle, with significant help, Evan felt overwhelming gratitude for how much had changed in the 12 months since that desperate airplane flight. Lila was thriving, hitting all her developmental milestones, sleeping through the night regularly, laughing frequently, clearly securely attached to both Evan and Danielle. She'd started taking tentative first steps a few weeks earlier, a moment Danielle had captured on video to share with Evan, who'd been in a meeting. She was babbling constantly, her vocabulary expanding daily with recognizable words mixed into her baby sounds. But beyond Lila's development, Evan himself had transformed. He was no longer the grief-stricken, overwhelmed single father who'd boarded that plane with a crying baby and no idea how to comfort her. He was confident in his parenting, actively engaged with his daughter, successfully balancing his company leadership with his family responsibilities. He still grieved Sarah, would always grieve her, but the grief no longer consumed him or prevented him from experiencing joy with his daughter. And central to that transformation was Danielle, her patience, her expertise, her genuine affection for Lila, her ability to support Evan without making him feel incompetent. She'd become far more than an employee. She was part of their family, the person Evan trusted absolutely with his daughter's care and well-being, someone whose perspective he valued on everything from parenting to business decisions to what takeout they should order for dinner. "Thank you," Evan told Danielle after the party guests had left and Lila was sleeping peacefully upstairs. "For everything this past year, for saving us on that plane, for taking this job, for transforming our lives. I don't think I've adequately expressed how grateful I am." "You don't need to keep thanking me," Danielle said warmly. "I love Lila. I love this work. And honestly, Evan, you and Lila have transformed my life too. This job has allowed me to save more money than I ever could have teaching. I'm on track to open my daycare much sooner than I'd hoped. You've been incredibly generous with both compensation and flexibility. So really, we've helped each other." "Speaking of the daycare," Evan said, I have a proposal I'd like you to consider. What if I invested in your daycare as a business venture? Not as a gift or charity, but as a genuine investment where I provide capital in exchange for minority ownership stake and returns if the business succeeds. You'd retain majority control and all decision-making authority, but you'd have the resources to launch much sooner than trying to save everything yourself. Danielle looked stunned. Evan, that's incredibly generous. But are you sure? Daycare isn't exactly a high-return investment compared to tech startups or other ventures you could invest in. I'm not interested in maximum returns, Evan said. I'm interested in investing in projects that matter, run by people I trust, that make genuine positive impact. Your daycare checks all those boxes, Danielle. This isn't charity disguised as investment. I genuinely believe you'll create something successful and meaningful, and I want to be part of making that happen. Can I think about it? Danielle asked. This is a huge decision, and I want to make sure I'm comfortable with the arrangement before committing to anything. Take all the time you need, Evan assured her. The offer stands whenever you're ready to discuss it seriously. 2 weeks later, Danielle approached Evan with a counteroffer. She'd consulted with a lawyer friend, researched similar investment arrangements, and created a proposal she felt comfortable with. They'd structure it as Evan providing capital investment in exchange for 30% equity. Danielle would retain 70% and full operational control, and they'd formalize everything through proper legal documentation to keep business and personal relationships separate. This protects both of us, Danielle explained. You have a legitimate ownership stake with actual returns if the business succeeds. I have majority control and can't be pressured into decisions I'm not comfortable with, just because you're the primary investor. And we've clearly separated our business partnership from our working relationship here with Lila. It's perfect, Evan agreed. Let's do it. Over the following months, while continuing to care for Lila, Danielle also worked on establishing her daycare. With Evan's investment, she was able to rent a perfect space, a converted brownstone in Brooklyn with multiple rooms, a backyard play area, and neighborhood character that felt welcoming rather than institutional. She completed all necessary licensing and certification requirements, purchased equipment and supplies, hired 2 assistant teachers she'd worked with previously, and began marketing to families. The daycare, she'd named it Grandmother's Garden in honor of her late grandmother, opened with just 5 enrolled children, but quickly filled to capacity as word spread about the quality of care and the sliding scale tuition structure that made it accessible to diverse families. Within 6 months, there was a waiting list, and Danielle was already planning expansion. You were right to invest in this, Danielle told Evan during one of their regular daycare business meetings, separate from their Lila-related meetings, as they'd agreed. I couldn't have done this without your capital and support, but the business model is genuinely working. We're profitable, families love the program, and we're making quality childcare accessible to people who couldn't otherwise afford it. This is everything I dreamed of creating. You created it, Evan said firmly. I just provided money. The vision, the execution, the quality programming, that's all you, Danielle. I'm proud to have supported it, but this success is yours. 18 months after their airplane meeting, Evan realized his feelings for Danielle had evolved beyond gratitude and professional respect into something that felt dangerously close to romantic attraction. He tried to dismiss these feelings. Danielle was his employee. There were massive power dynamics at play. Pursuing anything romantic would be incredibly inappropriate and potentially harmful to their excellent working relationship. But the feelings persisted and grew stronger. He found himself thinking about Danielle constantly when she wasn't around, looking forward to their daily interactions in ways that felt different from simple appreciation for good childcare. He noticed details about her he shouldn't be noticing: the way her natural curls framed her face, how her eyes lit up when she laughed, the graceful efficiency of her movements when caring for Lila. Evan confided in his mother during one of her visits, unable to keep the confusion and guilt to himself any longer. I think I have feelings for Danielle, he admitted. Romantic feelings, which is completely inappropriate given our relationship and the power dynamics and everything. But I can't seem to stop feeling this way. Margaret looked thoughtful rather than shocked. Have you considered that Danielle might have feelings for you too? Because from my observation, the way she looks at you sometimes suggests this might not be one-sided attraction. Even if that's true, which I doubt, it wouldn't make it appropriate, Evan protested. She's my employee. She depends on me for income, for housing, for the investment in her daycare. Any romantic pursuit on my part could be coercive given those power dynamics, even if I don't intend it that way. So what are you going to do? Margaret asked. Nothing, Evan said firmly. I'm going to continue being a good employer, maintain appropriate boundaries, and hopefully these feelings will fade over time. I can't risk damaging our working relationship or making Danielle uncomfortable when she's been so incredible for Lila and for me. But the feelings didn't fade. If anything, they intensified over the following months as Evan and Danielle continued working together, raising Lila as a team, building their business partnership around the daycare. Every shared moment, every laugh over Lila's latest antics, every deep conversation about parenting philosophies or business strategies, every accidental touch when passing Lila between them felt charged with unspoken attraction. 2 years after their airplane meeting, Danielle's daycare had become so successful that she needed to step back from full-time nannying to focus on business operations and expansion planning. She'd hired an assistant director to handle day-to-day management at the current location and was exploring options for opening a second location in a different Brooklyn neighborhood. I can't keep doing both, Danielle told Evan during one of their check-in meetings. Being Lila's full-time nanny while running a growing business. Something has to give, and I think we both know it needs to be the nannying. Lila is 2 now, ready for preschool, and honestly, Evan, you're perfectly capable of managing her care yourself at this point. Evan had known this conversation was coming, but still felt panic at the thought of Danielle leaving their daily lives. I understand completely, he made himself say. Your daycare has grown beyond what you can manage while also working here full-time. You've more than fulfilled your commitment to us, and Lila would benefit from preschool socialization anyway. This makes perfect sense, but I don't want to just disappear from Lila's life, Danielle added quickly. She's like family to me now. I'd like to stay connected. Maybe she could attend my daycare if you're comfortable with that, or we could do regular play dates, or however you want to structure ongoing connection. I'd like that very much, Evan said, relief flooding through him. And Danielle, I want you to know that you've changed our lives in ways I can never adequately thank you for. You saved us not just that day on the airplane, but every day since. You taught me how to be Lila's father, gave her the stable, loving care she needed during her most formative years, and became family to both of us. Whatever happens with work arrangements going forward, I hope we remain close. We will, Danielle assured him. You and Lila are too important to me for any work changes to affect that. 3 weeks later, Danielle moved into her own apartment near her daycare, and Lila started attending grandmother's garden as a student, rather than having her former nanny as daily caregiver. The transition was surprisingly smooth. Lila loved preschool, thrived with the other children, and saw Danielle regularly without the complexity of live-in employment relationship. But what surprised Evan was how much he missed having Danielle in his daily life, not just for Lila's care, but for the companionship, the conversations, the sense of shared purpose in raising his daughter. The apartment felt empty without Danielle's presence, and Evan found himself making excuses to text her about minor Lila updates just to maintain connection. Finally, 6 months after Danielle had moved out, and 2.5 years after their airplane meeting, Evan invited Danielle to dinner, just the 2 of them, Lila staying overnight with Evan's mother who was visiting. Not a business meeting, Evan clarified when extending the invitation. Just dinner between friends. I miss spending time with you beyond daycare pickup and drop-off. I'd like that, Danielle said warmly. I miss our conversations too. Let's do it. Over dinner at an upscale Italian restaurant, they talked about everything: Danielle's expansion plans for her daycare, Evan's latest company projects, Lila's development and personality, their families and childhood memories. The conversation flowed as easily as it always had, punctuated by laughter and comfortable silences that felt intimate rather than awkward. Toward the end of the meal, Evan gathered his courage. "Danielle, I need to tell you something. If it makes things uncomfortable, I apologize in advance, but I can't keep this to myself anymore." He took a breath. "I have feelings for you. Romantic feelings. They've been developing for a long time, probably longer than I want to admit, but I couldn't act on them while you were my employee because the power dynamics made that inappropriate. Now that we're no longer in an employment relationship, I wanted to be honest about how I feel. You're under absolutely no obligation to reciprocate or to respond to this in any particular way. I just needed you to know." Danielle was quiet for a long moment, and Evan felt panic rising. He'd made a terrible mistake, had misread everything, was about to lose one of the most important friendships in his life. But then Danielle smiled, a genuine warm smile that transformed her whole face. "Evan, I've had feelings for you for at least a year and a half," she admitted. "But like you, I couldn't act on them because of our working relationship and the power dynamics involved. I kept thinking I was imagining the attraction I sensed from you, convincing myself it was just gratitude or friendship rather than anything romantic. I can't believe we've both been feeling this way for so long without saying anything. So we've wasted time," Evan said, feeling hope and joy expanding in his chest. "Not wasted," Danielle corrected. "We waited until it was appropriate and ethical to pursue these feelings. That's what good people do, Evan. They prioritize what's right over what they want, in the moment. But now, we don't have to wait anymore." Their first kiss happened in the restaurant parking lot, tentative and sweet, both of them smiling too much for it to be technically skilled, but making it perfect nonetheless. When they pulled apart, Evan felt something he hadn't felt since before Sarah's death, not just happiness, but the bone-deep rightness of being with someone who truly understood him. "I'm not trying to replace Sarah," Evan said quietly, voicing the concern that had been bothering him. "I'll always love her and grieve her loss. I don't want you to think this means I've forgotten her or that you're just a substitute for what I lost." "I know that," Danielle assured him gently. "You'll always love Sarah. She was Lila's mother and your partner through important years of your life. I'm not threatened by that, Evan. I'm not trying to erase her or replace her. I'm just hoping I can be someone significant in your life moving forward, building something new rather than trying to recreate what you had before." "You already are significant," Evan said. "You've been significant since that airplane flight, when you heard my daughter crying and offered help instead of judgment. You became family long before you became anything romantic. This feels like a natural evolution of something that's been building all along." They dated for 6 months before Evan proposed, not because he had any doubts, but because he wanted to make sure Lila was comfortable with the changes in their family structure. They introduced the relationship to Lila gradually, letting her adjust to seeing Danielle in a different role, ensuring she felt secure and loved throughout the transition. Lila, who'd always adored Danielle, adapted beautifully. "Is Miss Danielle going to be my mama now?" she asked Evan one evening, with the blunt directness of a 3-year-old. "Miss Danielle is going to be part of our family," Evan explained carefully. "You had a mama Sarah who loved you very much, but who died before you could know her. Danielle won't replace your mama or try to erase her memory, but she loves you very much and wants to be part of your life. Is that okay with you?" "I love Miss Danielle," Lila said simply. "I'm glad she's staying." 3 years after meeting on an airplane, Evan and Danielle married in a small ceremony attended by close family and friends. Lila served as flower girl, proudly wearing a dress Danielle's mother had made specially for the occasion. Sarah's parents attended, giving their blessing to Evan moving forward while honoring their daughter's memory, a gesture that moved both Evan and Danielle deeply. In his vows, Evan said, "Danielle, you saved my daughter and me when we were at our lowest point. You taught me how to be Lila's father, gave us both the stability and love we desperately needed, and somehow in the process of helping us heal, you became the person I couldn't imagine life without. I promise to honor Sarah's memory while building a future with you, to support your dreams the way you've supported mine, to be your partner in parenting, in business, in everything life brings us. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love again after loss." In her vows, Danielle said, "Evan, when I heard Lila crying on that airplane, I had no idea that offering to help would change my entire life. You and Lila became my family when I didn't realize how much I needed one. You supported my dreams, invested in my future, treated me as an equal partner rather than just an employee. You showed me that love can grow from friendship and respect rather than just instant attraction. I promised to love Lila as my daughter while honoring Sarah's memory. To be your partner in building the life we both want. To keep offering help when I hear crying babies, metaphorical or literal, because that's what brought us together. 5 years after their airplane meeting, Evan and Danielle stood in the newly opened third location of Grandmother's Garden Daycare, watching Lila, now 5, play with her younger brother, 18-month-old Marcus, in the spacious indoor playground. The daycare network had grown beyond what either had imagined possible, serving hundreds of children across Brooklyn with the same sliding-scale accessibility and quality care that Danielle had originally envisioned. "Remember when we met?" Danielle asked, leaning against Evan as they watched their children play. "You were so desperate and exhausted, and Lila was crying so hard. Did you ever imagine this would be our life 5 years later?" "Not even remotely," Evan admitted. "I was just trying to survive that flight. I had no idea the woman who offered to help was going to become my daughter's nanny, then my business partner, then my wife, then mother to my second child. If someone had told me that day how things would unfold, I wouldn't have believed them." "Would you have wanted to know?" Danielle asked curiously. "If you could have seen this future that day on the airplane, would it have helped?" "I don't think so," Evan said thoughtfully. "I needed to take things day by day, step by step. Knowing about this happy ending wouldn't have made the grief and difficulty of those early months any easier to navigate. I had to live through it, learn from it, heal gradually. The journey was as important as the destination. Plus," he continued, "if I'd known you'd eventually become my wife, I might have been weird about the whole employer-employee thing and ruined everything by being self-conscious or inappropriate. Sometimes not knowing the future is a gift that lets you just experience things as they come." They stood together watching their children, Lila teaching Marcus how to climb up the toddler slide, both of them laughing as Marcus tumbled down, then immediately wanted to climb again. Their family, built from tragedy and chance encounters and persistent love. Their life, shaped by a crying baby on an airplane and a woman kind enough to offer help to a desperate stranger. Sometimes salvation came from unexpected places. Sometimes, a single act of compassion rippled outward, transforming multiple lives. And sometimes the person who helped you through your darkest moment became the person you built your brightest future with, proving that love could emerge from crisis, that families could form from broken pieces rebuilt with patience and care, that hope existed even in the most desperate circumstances. The millionaire and the nanny, the crying baby and the kind stranger. These were the foundation stories of their family, the origin point of everything that followed. And they would tell these stories to their children, and someday their grandchildren, tales of how compassion changes lives, how accepting help is strength rather than weakness, how the people who show up during your hardest moments often become your most important relationships. But for now, standing together watching their children play, Evan and Danielle were just grateful for that airplane flight, for Lila's crying that had brought them together, for every difficult and beautiful moment since. Their story proved that sometimes the unthinkable thing a stranger does is simply offer help without expecting anything in return, and sometimes that simple act becomes the beginning of everything that matters most. 10 years after their fateful airplane meeting, Evan and Danielle sat together at the annual Grandmother's Garden fundraising gala, watching as their daycare network's impact was celebrated by hundreds of families, donors, and community supporters. The organization had grown to include 8 locations across New York City, serving over 600 children with the same commitment to accessibility and quality care that had defined the original location. Lila, now 10 years old, stood on stage with confidence beyond her years, delivering a speech about what Grandmother's Garden meant to her as someone who'd attended since age 2. "My mama Danielle started this daycare because her grandmother taught her that every child deserves to feel safe and loved," Lila said, her voice clear in the microphone. Before Mama came into our lives, my dad didn't know how to take care of me very well. I was too little to remember, but he tells me I cried a lot because he was sad and didn't know what to do. Then Mama helped him on an airplane, and everything got better. Evan felt Danielle squeeze his hand as they listened to their daughter, because that's what Lila had become to Danielle, just as much as Marcus and their youngest daughter, 3-year-old Sarah, named in honor of Evan's first wife, with her parents' blessing, tell the story that had become family legend. Mama says that helping people when they need it most is the most important work anyone can do, Lila continued. She helped my dad when he needed it, and now her daycares help hundreds of families who need good childcare. That's what I want to do when I grow up too, help people who need it, because that's what makes the world better. The audience applauded enthusiastically, and Lila bounded off stage to join her family, Marcus immediately demanding that his big sister play with him, little Sarah reaching for Danielle with the complete trust that only very young children have in their parents. She's incredible, Evan murmured to Danielle. Both of them are. Sarah too, when she's older. You've raised remarkable children. We've raised them, Danielle corrected gently. This is partnership, Evan. You're as much responsible for who they're becoming as I am. Later that evening, after the gala had ended and their children were sleeping peacefully at home under the watchful eye of Evan's mother who'd flown in for the event, Evan and Danielle took a rare, quiet walk through Central Park. It was June, the weather perfect, the park alive with late evening joggers and couples, and people just enjoying the summer night. Do you ever think about that flight? Evan asked as they walked hand in hand past Bethesda Fountain. About how different our lives would be if you hadn't offered to help with Lila that day. All the time, Danielle admitted. If I'd just put in headphones and ignored the crying like most people do, we never would have met. You would have hired a different nanny eventually. I'd still be teaching preschool and saving slowly toward opening a daycare. Lila would have grown up without me in her life. Everything would be completely different. I don't like imagining that alternate timeline, Evan said. A world where you're not part of my life, where Lila doesn't have you as her mother, where Marcus and Sarah don't exist. That world feels empty and wrong. But it was so close to being our reality, Danielle pointed out. I almost didn't offer to help that day. I heard Lila crying and felt sympathy, but I was tired from my own flight stress, and my first instinct was to put in my earbuds and ignore it like everyone else was doing. It was only when I saw your face so desperate and exhausted and lost that I couldn't not offer help. That moment of choosing compassion over comfort changed both our lives completely. They walked in companionable silence for a while, both reflecting on the decade-long journey from that airplane to this moment. So much had changed, yet the fundamental dynamic remained the same, Danielle offering help and support, Evan accepting it with gratitude, both of them building something meaningful together. I got an interesting call yesterday, Danielle said as they found a bench overlooking the lake. A producer from a major talk show wants to interview us about our story, the airplane meeting, the daycare network, how we built all this. Apparently one of the gala attendees has connections and pitched our story as an inspirational segment. How do you feel about that? Evan asked carefully. Being that public about our personal story. Conflicted, Danielle admitted. On one hand, the publicity could be incredible for the daycare network, increased donations, more families learning about our services, potential to expand to other cities. On the other hand, I worry about exploiting our story for attention, about reducing our complicated journey to a feel-good soundbite, about how that level of publicity might affect the kids. What if we did it but with clear boundaries? Evan suggested. We'd talk about the airplane meeting and the daycare work, but we'd keep the children's faces private and establish limits on how personal the questions could get. That way we get the publicity benefits without sacrificing privacy or turning our family into entertainment. That could work, Danielle said thoughtfully. And honestly, if our story inspires even one person to offer help to a stranger in need or encourages someone to pursue their dream of opening a community-focused business, or shows grieving parents that life can be joyful again after loss, isn't that worth some discomfort about publicity? 12. They ultimately agreed to do the interview, which aired 3 months later to significant positive response. The segment focused on the airplane meeting, Danielle's courage in offering help, Evan's willingness to accept assistance during his most vulnerable time, and the daycare network they'd built together that now served hundreds of families with the same compassion that had brought them together. The most powerful moment came when the interviewer asked what advice they'd give to people considering whether to help a stranger in distress. "Always offer," Danielle said without hesitation. "You never know when your small act of kindness might change someone's entire life trajectory." That crying baby on the airplane seemed like just an inconvenience to most passengers. But to Evan, it represented his grief and helplessness and fear of failing his daughter. "My willingness to help in that moment created ripples that are still spreading 10 years later. And if you're the person struggling," Evan added, "accept help when it's offered." I was raised to believe that accepting assistance was weakness, that real men handled everything themselves. That belief almost destroyed me after Sarah died. Learning to accept help first from Danielle with Lila, then from my family and friends, then eventually from grief counselors and support groups, that's what allowed me to heal and build a life worth living again. Strength isn't doing everything alone. Strength is recognizing when you need help and being humble enough to accept it. The interview sparked a wave of interest in Grandmother's Garden, resulting in significant donation increases, a waiting list that stretched across all 8 locations, and serious inquiries from other cities about franchising the model. Evan and Danielle found themselves in the unexpected position of building not just a daycare network, but a national movement around accessible, high-quality childcare. "This is so much bigger than I ever imagined," Danielle told Evan one evening as they reviewed expansion proposals from Boston, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. "I just wanted one little daycare in Brooklyn. Now we're potentially going national. That's terrifying and exciting in equal measure. You don't have to do this if it feels like too much," Evan assured her. "You've already achieved the dream you had when we met multiple successful locations, serving hundreds of families. There's no pressure to keep expanding just because opportunities exist." "But what if we could help thousands of families instead of hundreds?" Danielle countered. "What if this model could truly transform how America thinks about childcare accessibility? Isn't there some obligation to pursue that potential when we have the resources and platform to make it happen? Only if it doesn't cost you the joy that made you want to do this work in the first place," Evan said. "I've watched entrepreneurs scale too quickly, lose sight of their original mission, burn out from growth that felt obligatory rather than exciting. I don't want that for you, Danielle. Your happiness and our family's well-being matter more than expanding the business." They ultimately decided to pilot franchise locations in 2 cities, Boston and Philadelphia, with intensive support and oversight to ensure the quality and mission remained consistent with the Brooklyn locations. Danielle hired an operations director to manage day-to-day business concerns, freeing her to focus on program quality, mission alignment, and the actual relationships with families and children that had always been her passion. 15 years after their airplane meeting, Evan and Danielle celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary by returning to San Francisco and booking the exact same flight, Flight 228 from San Francisco to New York, where they'd originally met. They sat in the same seats they'd occupied that fateful day, though this time without a crying baby, and with significantly more joy than either had possessed 15 years earlier. "This is surreal," Danielle said, settling into her seat and looking across the aisle at Evan. "Sitting here where it all started, remembering how desperate you looked and how tiny Lila was. I can't believe that was 15 years ago. Do you remember what you thought when you first heard her crying?" Evan asked curiously. "Honestly, my first thought was annoyance that my flight would be loud," Danielle admitted with slight embarrassment. "I'm not proud of that initial reaction, but then I looked over and saw your face so exhausted and lost, and I saw Lila's little red scrunched face, and all the annoyance vanished. I just felt sympathy and this pull to help, like I couldn't not offer assistance even though we were complete strangers." "What made you trust me enough to hold my daughter?" Evan asked. "I've always wondered about that. You didn't know me, didn't know if I was safe or stable or even if Lila was actually my child, yet you took her without hesitation." "Your eyes," Danielle said simply. "I saw genuine love and desperation in your eyes. You weren't a neglectful parent who didn't care that your baby was crying. You were a devoted parent who desperately wanted to help her but didn't know how. That combination, love plus helplessness, made me trust that you were safe and that offering help was the right thing to do." "I'm so grateful you trusted that instinct," Evan said, "and I'm grateful I was humble enough to accept help from a stranger instead of insisting I could handle everything myself." As their flight took off, they reminisced about that original journey. Evan's panic, Lila's eventual peaceful sleep against Danielle's chest, the techniques Danielle had taught, the tentative dinner invitation that had started their personal relationship. They laughed at how much had seemed impossible then that was now just their normal life. "If someone had told me that day that I'd marry you, and we'd have 3 children together and build a national childcare network," Evan said, "I would have thought they were delusional. I was just trying to survive the flight without having a breakdown. The idea of happiness seemed impossible. But here we are," Danielle said, reaching across the aisle to squeeze his hand. "Happy, stable, building meaningful lives together." That desperate moment on an airplane became the foundation for everything we have now. 20 years after their airplane meeting, Grandmother's Garden had grown to 34 locations across 8 cities, serving over 3,000 children and employing nearly 400 staff members. The organization had won national awards for innovative childcare models, had been featured in major publications as an example of business that prioritized mission over profit, and had inspired dozens of similar programs in other communities. But for Evan and Danielle, the most meaningful impact wasn't the scale. It was the individual stories of families whose lives had been transformed by accessible, quality childcare. Single parents who could work full-time knowing their children were safe and loved. Low-income families who could afford care that enriched their children's development rather than just supervised them. Children who thrived in environments that valued their individuality and supported their growth. "We're changing generational trajectories," Danielle told Evan during one of their regular reflection conversations about the organization's impact. "Children who attend Grandmother's Garden arrive at kindergarten better prepared than their peers. They're more socially competent, more emotionally regulated, more curious about learning. That early foundation affects everything that follows academic success, career opportunities, their own capacity to parent well someday. We're not just providing childcare, we're interrupting cycles of poverty and disadvantage." "That's your grandmother's legacy," Evan observed. "She provided that same foundation for you, which enabled you to build these opportunities for others. Now you're creating that foundation for thousands of children who will grow up to create opportunities for others. The ripple effects are genuinely incalculable." Lila, now 20 years old and studying early childhood education in college, had announced her intention to join Grandmother's Garden after graduation, not because of family pressure, but because she'd grown up seeing the organization's impact and wanted to contribute to that mission. "I want to do what you did, Mama," Lila told Danielle during a mother-daughter lunch. "See children who need support and provide it with dignity and love. Help families access resources that transform their circumstances. You showed me what meaningful work looks like." Marcus, 17, and trying to decide on colleges, was considering business school with the goal of eventually handling Grandmother's Garden's operations and expansion. "Someone needs to understand the financial and logistical side, so you and Dad can focus on program quality and mission," Marcus reasoned with the practical wisdom he'd inherited from both parents. "I'm good at systems and strategy. Let me use those skills to support the work you care about most." Even little Sarah, now 13 and discovering her own passions, talked about becoming a pediatrician, specifically to serve families in the communities where Grandmother's Garden operated. "Healthcare access is just as important as childcare access," Sarah explained with adolescent certainty. "You helped with one barrier families face. I want to help with another." "We raised activists," Danielle told Evan with pride after one family dinner, where all 3 children had enthusiastically discussed their career plans focused on social impact. "They grew up seeing us build an organization that prioritizes mission over profit. and now they want to do the same in their own ways. That's the best possible outcome of our work. It's your influence, Evan said. You modeled what it looks like to care about others, to build something meaningful, to use your skills and resources to create change. Of course, our children absorb those values. They watched you live them every day. 25 years after their airplane meeting, Evan and Danielle stood together at a celebration marking Grandmother's Garden's milestone anniversary. The event, held at the original Brooklyn location, brought together current families, former students now adults, staff members past and present, community partners, and the countless people whose lives had intersected with the organization over a quarter century. The most moving testimonials came from former students now adults in their 20s, who shared how Grandmother's Garden had shaped their lives. A young woman who'd attended as a low-income scholarship student and was now a social worker serving similar families. A man who'd arrived as a shy 3-year-old and credited the program's emphasis on emotional intelligence with his current work as a therapist. Siblings who'd attended together and were now teachers specifically because they wanted to create the same supportive environment they'd experienced. What Grandmother's Garden gave me wasn't just childcare, one speaker said. It was the first place I felt valued as a whole person, where my family's economic situation didn't determine how I was treated, where teachers genuinely cared about my well-being and growth. That experience, being seen and valued, regardless of my circumstances, shaped my entire understanding of my own worth. I'm successful today not just because of the educational foundation I received here, but because I learned early that I deserved opportunities and support. After the formal program ended and guests mingled over cake and coffee, a middle-aged woman approached Danielle with tears in her eyes. "You don't remember me," the woman said, "but 20 years ago, I was on an airplane from San Francisco to New York. I was the flight attendant who brought you warm milk for the crying baby you were holding. I watched you calm that baby with such grace and skill, and I remember thinking you were extraordinary with children." Danielle stared at the woman, memory slowly returning. "I do remember you. You were so kind and helpful when Evan Mr. Brooks was struggling with Lila. You brought supplies and didn't make him feel judged like some other passengers did. I was impressed by both of you that day," the woman continued, "by his willingness to accept help and by your compassion in offering it. I had no idea then that you'd go on to build all this," she gestured around the packed celebration, "or that the baby I saw crying would grow up in this remarkable family. But somehow I'm not surprised. The kindness and competence you showed that day clearly extended far beyond one airplane flight." "That kindness started everything," Danielle said, looking around at the celebration, at the families laughing together, at her own adult children helping serve cake to current students, at Evan talking animatedly with former board members about expansion plans. One moment of choosing compassion over comfort created ripples that are still spreading 25 years later. I couldn't have imagined any of this that day on the airplane. That evening, after the celebration had ended and they were back home, Evan and Danielle sat together in the comfortable exhaustion that comes after meaningful events. Their children were out with friends, the house quiet, just the two of them reflecting on the extraordinary journey from that airplane to this moment. 25 years, Evan said, shaking his head with wonder. A quarter century since you heard Lila crying and decided to help instead of ignore. Danielle, do you ever regret it? Taking on all of this, me and my grief and my baby, and eventually building this enormous organization? Your life would have been simpler if you'd just put in headphones that day. Simpler but emptier, Danielle said without hesitation. Evan, you and Lila and our family and Grandmother's Garden, this is the life I was meant to live. I didn't know that at 28, when I was teaching preschool and dreaming of one small daycare. But looking back now, I can see that everything led to that airplane moment. My childhood watching my grandmother care for children, my early childcare experience, my teaching career, my dream of opening a daycare, all of it prepared me to be exactly the person you and Lila needed when you needed it most. Do you think it was fate? Evan asked. That we were meant to meet, that some cosmic force put you in that specific seat on that specific flight so you'd hear Lila crying? I don't know about fate, Danielle said thoughtfully, But I do think there are moments when we face choices that shape everything that follows. I could have ignored Lila's crying. I could have offered help but then never seen you again after that flight. I could have declined your job offer or kept our relationship strictly professional. Each moment, I chose connection over distance, compassion over comfort, possibility over safety. Those choices created this life. And I could have refused your help on the plane, Evan added. I could have kept trying to handle everything myself out of pride. I could have not offered you the nanny position or kept our relationship strictly employer-employee. Each moment, I chose to accept help, to be vulnerable, to let someone in even though that was terrifying after losing Sarah. Those choices created this life too. So maybe it's not fate but choices, Danielle concluded. Countless small choices to be kind, to help, to accept help, to build connection. Those choices compounded over years into this extraordinary life we've built together. They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, 25 years of shared history between them. The millionaire who'd been lost and grieving with a crying baby. The nanny who'd heard that crying and offered help without expecting anything in return. Their story had become legend in childcare circles, an example of how compassion transforms lives, how accepting help is strength rather than weakness, how the people who show up during crisis often become the most important relationships in our lives. But beyond the legend was the reality: two real people who'd met by chance and built something extraordinary through countless daily choices to show up for each other, for their children, and for the families they served through grandmother's garden. Their love story wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was about showing up, helping when help was needed, accepting help when it was offered, building trust through consistent presence and care. What do you think Lila from that airplane flight would say if she could see her life now? Danielle asked with amusement. If that crying 6-month-old could somehow know she'd grow up with a mother who wasn't the one who gave birth to her, but who loved her just as fiercely, with siblings she adored, in a family built from grief and chance and persistent love. I think she'd stop crying, Evan said, smiling, because that baby was crying from sensing my grief and fear and helplessness. If she could see this future, the joy and stability and love we've built, she'd feel safe and peaceful, which is exactly what happened the moment you held her on that airplane. You gave her the safety and peace she was crying for. And you gave me purpose and resources to build something meaningful, Danielle added. Before I met you, I had dreams but limited means to achieve them. Your investment in my daycare, your belief in my abilities, your partnership in raising children and building an organization that transformed my small dream into something that's helped thousands of families. We saved each other, Evan. That's what makes this story so powerful. 30 years after their airplane meeting, Evan and Danielle celebrated their 30-year anniversary, not of their marriage, which had been 12 years shorter, but of the day they'd met on Flight 228. They'd made it a family tradition to commemorate that day, gathering their children, and now grandchildren. Lila had 2 young daughters, to tell the story of the crying baby and the kind stranger, and how their entire family had originated from one moment of compassion. Tell the story, Grandma, Lila's 5-year-old daughter begged, climbing into Danielle's lap. Tell about when Grandpa didn't know how to stop Mommy from crying and you saved them. Danielle told the story one more time, with embellishments the children loved and details that made Lila, now a successful early childhood education director herself, roll her eyes affectionately at her mother's dramatics. But the core remained true: a desperate father, a crying baby, a kind stranger, and the choice to help that had transformed multiple lives. The most important lesson, Danielle told her granddaughters as the story concluded, is that you should always help when you see someone struggling, even if it's inconvenient, even if you don't know them, even if helping might be uncomfortable, because that moment of choosing compassion over comfort could change someone's entire life. It certainly changed mine and your grandpa's. And mine, Lila added, because without Grandma's help that day, Grandpa wouldn't have known how to be a good father to me. I wouldn't have grown up with a mother who taught me everything about caring for children. This entire family wouldn't exist. One act of kindness created all of us. Later that evening, After the family celebration had wound down and Evan and Danielle were alone again, they stood together at their window looking out at the Manhattan skyline that had been the backdrop of their entire relationship. 30 years. 3 decades since a crying baby on an airplane had brought them together. So much had changed. They were older now, grayer, their children grown with children of their own, their lives full in ways they'd never imagined that desperate day on Flight 228. "Do you think we'd do it all again?" Evan asked. "If we could go back to that airplane knowing everything we know now, would we make the same choices?" "Every single one," Danielle said without hesitation, "including the difficult parts, your grief, the challenges of blending our lives, the stresses of building grandmother's garden, all of it, because those challenges shaped us into the people we are now, and I like who we've become, both individually and together." "Me too," Evan agreed. "You know what strikes me most about our story? It's not dramatic or unusual in its components. Babies cry on airplanes all the time. People offer help to strangers regularly. Single parents hire nannies constantly. None of those individual elements are remarkable. But the combination, the choices we each made at every step that created something remarkable," Danielle finished. "I chose to help. You chose to accept help. We chose to build trust, to develop friendship, to eventually pursue romance when it was appropriate, to partner in parenting and business, to keep choosing each other every day for 30 years. Those choices accumulated into this extraordinary life. The unthinkable thing you did," Evan said, referring to the title that had followed their story through various media coverage over the years, "wasn't actually unthinkable. It was simply kind. You heard a baby crying and you helped. That's what humans are supposed to do, see each other's struggles and offer support. The fact that it's considered remarkable or unthinkable says more about how we've normalized ignoring others' distress than about the unusualness of your compassion. I mean, maybe that's the real lesson of our story," Danielle said thoughtfully. "Not that I did something extraordinary, but that ordinary kindness can have extraordinary ripple effects. That choosing to help instead of ignore, choosing connection over distance, choosing compassion over comfort. These ordinary choices create extraordinary transformations when we commit to them consistently. 30 years, 3 children, 8 grandchildren, 34 daycare locations, and countless transformed lives, all originating from one crying baby on one airplane and one woman who chose compassion when she could have chosen comfort. That was their legacy. Not the business success or the awards or the recognition, but the simple demonstration that helping when help is needed creates ripples extending far beyond what we can predict or measure. The millionaire's baby wouldn't stop crying on the plane. Then a black woman did the unthinkable. She helped. And from that single act of choosing compassion over comfort emerged a family, an organization, and a movement, proving that kindness changes everything. That accepting help is strength, not weakness. That the people who show up during our darkest moments often become our most important relationships. That ordinary humans choosing connection create extraordinary transformations. And they lived that truth every day for 30 years, and counting, still choosing each other, still choosing compassion, still creating ripples of kindness, extending outward from that original airplane flight, when a crying baby brought 2 strangers together and changed countless lives in the process.